Thank you for joining me live. This is the Voice of Job Seekers Live. Of course, this is not the podcast part. This is actually the video part. You're going to see this on my timeline, so if you feel like you need to go back to it and get the information you can, we'll also try to make it in some places where you can get the information available. This is going to be about what you need to know in order to find jobs through USAJOBs gov. And note the URL because it's not .com, it's .gov. This is so that you can find jobs in the federal sector for those of you who feel like they want to transition from the civilian world to the federal world, or maybe you might be a current federal employee and you've been thinking about finding another job. This is the way to also find jobs. If you're a military spouse, or if you're in the military, then this is a good opportunity for you to look for other places to transfer to. Of course, there are the other options, but of course, we're trying to cover the large spectrum of folks that are out there. And I know a lot of you who are connected with me. Some of you have said for a while, could you give us something to find jobs on USA Jobs? And also, they asked about federal resumes, Robin. This is Robin Schlinger, who is a certified resume writer, career coach. She's been doing this for years and it had government contracts and clients, and she has been doing this so that people can get traction. And she has this presentation so that it will give you an idea on how to navigate. It won't show you everything. Some things you're just going to have to go through USA Jobs and get an idea on how it works. What are the different character limits per section? How the job descriptions are written. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I want to welcome Robin to the show. How are you?
I am great, and there are ways to get around those character limits
Yes.
depending on the job announcement. So I'll be talking a little bit about that later on. I am happy to be here today, and I will be showing you some of the ropes, not exactly how to write the resume, but the information you need to have before you even decide to apply for a job, and the information you'll need to know in order to prepare your federal resume.
Yeah. And what we want to do is we'll probably go the full hour and maybe a little bit over as we can to try to answer questions if you have questions. A lot of you I know are going to be watching later because you're probably working or that you got something else going on. But some of you I know are going to join us live. And if you're joining us late, that's okay. We got an early start. So don't feel bad that you feel like you missed a part of it because, again, this could be replayed anytime. It's also going to be on my linked YouTube channel and a couple of other places as well. You can also catch it on Twitter right now. You can also catch it on my Facebook page if you find me on Facebook. You should, and anybody can watch this presentation as we're going to do it. Happy Veterans Day, by the way. That's not a by the way. This is one of the reasons why people chose this date. But those of you who serve our country so valiantly and have sacrificed for the freedoms that we have today, we thank you very much for giving that to us. I include my son in that group, who is an Air Force veteran now. So he might even show up. Who knows? So in any case, Robin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. This is going to be half presentation, half a portion of it is going to be conversation. And I'm going to try to watch the chat for any questions that you all may have, as well as to interject any questions that I may have and to make any observations that are there. So don't be surprised that this is going to be in a pseudo or quasi presentation. We don't mean to kill you by PowerPoint. We're just trying to show you the best way so that you can go back and look at it, and we'll give you a place at some point where there'll be a SlideShare presentation where you can go and you can actually download it. And I know what a few people are thinking. You don't necessarily have to download it, but it would help if you did, for some of you who might be interested in just getting the details of what Robin will go through. Robin, go ahead and get us started.
Okay.
And here we go. Robin Schlinger, she's going to hit us up. And again, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to add some commentary. And we'll answer as we have. Again, this is just a portion of what you'll need to know. There's a lot more to what you'll probably need to go, but a lot of it you'll have to find out as you go through. And then you can contact Robin as she is the expert in USAJOBs gov. So go ahead, Robin.
We will go, and actually, USAJOBs.com can also work. Just
Oh,
goes
it
to
does work.
USAJOBs.gov.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
if you type
Good to know.
USAJOBs.com, you'll just get to USAJOBs.gov, even
Gotcha.
though it's both the same. So we're first going to cover where to look for federal jobs, and it's not only USAJOBs.gov. There's other places, and in many cases, you'll still apply in a similar fashion. And I'm going to go through 8 steps. This is really important. This is all the preliminary tips that you need to do before starting the process. Because I think that's really important. Because if you don't go through these steps, no matter how well you write your resume, it's just not going to work. So the first thing you want to do is to go where you're going to look for the federal jobs, 8 steps, strategies if you're not a match for a job, and I might cover a little bit of an introduction to federal resumes.
Okay.
So it's where to look for jobs. The main site is USAJOBs.gov, as we've discussed. And you'll come up with a screen. It will change as they change their messages for each day. So it might say this, it might say other stuff, but it's different and it changes around a little bit. But it will look like this, and there'll be a search area and a location area for you to easily search for jobs. And it also will go through some of the steps that you're going to need to create. They recommend that you create a USA Jobs profile, and you can create that by going ahead and sign. I have it as sign in, but you first need to go create the profile. You're going to have to create a government account, and to be able to do that, and it may be the same account as you have for your passport stuff if you have the pass program or whatever, because there's this general thing and you could be using the same account both ways, but you'll have to go ahead and set it up to be able to apply for many jobs. And basically what we're going to do is looking at the fact that the federal government striates the jobs based on who you are in the hiring path. So this is based on what your background is, whether it's open to the public, a veteran, National Guard, senior executive, whether you're a family of an overseas employee, whether you have experience in the Peace Corps or VISTA, if you're a federal employee, military spouse, student, individual with disability, a Native American, or other special authorities. For many of these jobs, either the job may be only open to folks who meet these categories, or if you are in one of these categories, you may have an edge on folks who are only from the public. I will be going through some of these paths because that's really important to understand later. And I was asked a question by you of what does the application process look like?
Right. Yes.
So the first thing you do is you need to create a USA Jobs profile with an account. And then you search for the job. So we've covered a little bit of that. Next, we need to review the job announcement. And much of my information today is going to be this critical step number 3, which is to review the job announcement. Because unless you review it and fully understand the job announcement, the rest of this is not going to make any sense. Because if you don't really understand the job announcement, you can't prepare your resume and you can't prepare your application. This is the critical part. And then you may want someone to help you with your resume, or simply use the USA Jobs account where there may be some limitations to character count, but they've become a lot bigger and there's ways around them. So I wouldn't worry that much about character counts. I'm more concerned about including information. And then once you prepare your application, you submit it. Once the application is submitted, the agency is going to review the application. There's going to be a group of people, not necessarily from the agency, could be, but not the hiring manager, who is going to score your application for points. And if your application meets the requirements for best qualified and you have a high enough preference level, or there's no one ahead of you with that preference level, you will be referred to the hiring manager, who can either choose to interview everyone or nobody. Generally, they'll interview everybody who has been forwarded to them as the best qualified candidate. And based on recent studies, most of the time, only best qualified candidates get interviewed. And they may call it something different. They may call it gold. They may call it exceptional. They'll call it something in the announcement. But they'll only interview the people who are in that top category. And if you're a disabled vet, you may be able to get there faster. And then they'll interview the folks who are there and select the person that they want, who has been forwarded to them, or nobody. Because if nobody's in that best qualified category, or they don't want anybody who's there, they'll just cancel the announcement.
I got a question for you, Robin, and I was thinking about this. You mentioned it's important for the content to be on point, rather than worry about the character and all that, because all that can be fixed. You're absolutely right. The language that's very often that's used in these, and I'm not talking about English. I'm talking about as military and federal entities have their own language.
They have their own acronyms,
Right,
and things and such. So you're going to have to get to understand that, and you may need to work with an expert to help translate that for you. Because even though there are sites such as ONET available, which may do a little bit of that translation, it really doesn't do that. So if you are unsure of how to translate that language, you may want to seek the help of somebody who's been through the ropes, works for the federal government, or someone like me who's a resume writer who's been writing these for a long time.
Now, when you're doing these, and I know sometimes it's not, I want to say industry, not particularly industry, but per job, it may be exclusive. So if someone has done something in one job and they're trying to find their way to use their transferable skills and put it in a plain old language, should they use acronyms or?
They should define the acronyms and then use them.
Okay. Yep. That's what we're shooting for.
I don't think you get rid of acronyms, especially if the acronyms are also listed in the job, or it's something, if you've been in the military or something, someone may know about it, or may know what those acronyms are.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is when the agency is reviewing applications, they no longer are using applicant tracking systems. Somebody humanly reads every single application, which is really strange, because the federal government actually invented basically contracted out, and the first applicant tracking software systems were from the federal government. Mm-hmm. And for many years, the federal government had a whole slew, including something called Resumix and other ones that were applicant tracking systems, and they've gotten rid of all of them. The last agency to use an applicant tracking system, which was NASA, which was basically reading applicants just for keywords, went away. This actually stopped using it this year. That was the last agency that was using Resumix. There's no agency right now, except maybe some of the financial ones for the SEC, and a couple of other quasi organizations like the FDIC that are quasi federal
Hmm.
that are using the that are using basically federal resume that are using applicant tracking systems.
Okay.
Most agencies are not anything through USAJOBs.
Okay. All right. Very good.
I got some notifications. So the agency will select the candidate and then you'll get a job offer once you get the interview. Or they may not select a candidate at all and then they may relist it and repost it. Happens often.
Hmm.
Studies said that less than 50% of applications actually even get of announcements even get filled because people don't go and review the job announcement, make sure that they're qualified and have an application that will qualify them as best qualified. If nobody's best qualified, they don't even have anybody to send for an interview.
Okay. All right. Good to know.
And then you search for the job, and I put in a keyword, chemical engineer, in the location here. And when you do that, you come up with a list. And I came up with a list the day that I did this, which was earlier this year, for about 29 jobs. So we'll have the locations, the salary, plus who can apply within these symbols that we previously showed on the other page. So you can kind of tell if you're eligible or not if you memorize the symbols that you had. You can also go through and filter it if you want to. There's all sorts of filters. You can select what filters you want here. You can filter by salary, by grade, and we'll discuss the grade later, by department of agency or series, and I'll discuss some series stuff later with you also. And then we can also look at filters of location, work schedule, whether it's permanent, temporary, or other kinds of things, clearances, and sensitivity or risk, and basically all sorts of other items. It will depend on the keywords that you choose. There may actually be more filters. And not only is USAJOBs a place to find jobs, I always recommend folks do networking. Many agencies, and in fact, I was talking to somebody today, a potential client who works for one agency, says they only hire people they know. It's very insular. So you need to network to get a job with this particular agency. Even though that's not quote unquote legal and the way it's supposed to be done, it's the way it's done. And it's done that way in most agencies. Some agencies are more open than others. Other agencies are very insular. You look at current federal employee. If you're a current federal employee, there may be an internal posting. I write many of those, and they're not going to be listed in USAJOBs. They're going to be sent to you because they're some sort of side promotion or promotion within the grade that you're in. And for non-competitive service, many of these jobs have folks with very narrow specialties, but there's lots of them, people who have certain security clearances, folks who are attorneys, doctors, or engineers, places where they're looking for specialized stuff, and it's happening more and more in agencies because this allows them to get around veterans' preference.
Now, just to be clear, people should, if you only have security clearance if you're a federal employee. So likely that's something you'll want to list. And
You have to list it.
you
You
have to
will
list.
want to and have to. And I have worked with doing somebody who is the head of all clearances for a major military, for a major part of the government, who told me it's fine to list your clearances. Don't worry about it. That's not hidden.
Okay.
That's not quote unquote hidden information.
And just to further clarify, if you're a civilian applying to a federal job, you don't have to worry about
You
clearance.
do have to worry about it. These
Oh,
days,
okay. Go ahead.
if a job says it requires clearance, especially if it's a category that's kind of like top secret, that can sometimes be a job requirement, number one, and it usually is that you have it. And they say you can apply and they'll take you, but they won't because it can take them upwards to a year to get you that clearance. They have no guarantee you're going to get it, and it costs them a substantial sum of money. So, and it's also likely that you haven't done the job duties in the way they really want you to do it if you don't have that clearance. So, unless it's some sort of really specialized job, like for example, once I did somebody who had been chief information officer of a
Mm-hmm.
Fortune 500 company, and there was an SES job that was requiring IT experience, which was exactly what he had done. It was that kind of technologies.
Mm-hmm.
He got the job, but he had to wait a year before he ended up taking it in order to get through the clearance.
Right. Right.
So it'll take a while to get it, and unless it's a job, and likelihood if it is a clearance, there's going to be somebody who's been in the military who has clearance and stuff like that that will help with that particular sort of thing.
Okay.
So I'd say to go to each agency site that you think you want to work for to find their career links. There's a list of agencies for accepted service. This is I think this is out of date, but it's there. And then there's also a list of all federal agencies on their website. So that may be a better source to do it.
Okay.
And there's another place you can go. And what that is in the current presidential administration, these are political jobs. So if you worked on a campaign and you're known by political folks, because you're going to have to get that recommendation, because you likely have to be politically connected. Everybody can apply, but when they announce these things, they get over 1 million people applying each time when they open up a new administration. But I've helped folks get positions all the way up to being an ambassador.
Mm.
So this kind of application can work, but you have to know the person and you have to be asked.
Okay.
And then students can look for jobs using pathways or other programs. Click on the students tab. I'm not going to go through that with this presentation because it gets really involved. And you can also match your major to a federal career by using this link. In addition, disabled vets and sometimes even military spouses may be able to apply for jobs that aren't listed. This is because you qualify in a non-competitive category. And if you are a disabled vet, I recommend you contact your VA representative at the Veterans Administration for information on how to do it. I spent a couple of years where I was writing resumes for folks for the VA and helping folks where there weren't jobs listed, but we would write the resumes for the type of jobs that they'd want, and then they'd find them jobs.
Yeah, that's what I used to do when I back in 2010 to around 2000, the beginning of 2012. I got a chance to not only write resumes and coach, but also help guide a lot of people through that particular process that we had at that particular time. And that was a different set of rules because people were transitioning, they had to transition out as some of the federal bases were closing at that particular time because of initiative by George Bush. That a lot of those bases like Fort Knox and Fort McPherson had to change all what they're doing. So a lot of people had to either exit completely or exit out of it. And now it's a little bit different because a lot of people have been in their jobs since that time for many, many years and have thought about it. And because we have the pandemic, people have really seriously thought this is the best time for me to make the move or not make it at all.
I see a question up there. If I'm active duty and about to discharge, does the expiration date of my clearance status matter when I'm applying to jobs?
Yes.
Actually, if one thing about clearance, if it's just recently expired, put it on there and apply for that job. It's because if you go ahead and are able to do that, they don't have to do the full search. They know that you're going to be clearable because it's only a real short period of time. And I just put the expiration date down and I say that you had clearance recently. The top secret, and my writing is if somebody has never had clearance, is a lot more, takes them a lot longer. Now they're only going to have to research a really small portion of your life, not the life that they already investigated before.
Oh, that's interesting because as people, well, I won't jump into it because that would be jumping in part to federal resumes, which we're trying to save that discussion for later. So we'll move on and keep that answer as
Right.
it is.
Right. And I really want to cover this last thing because this
Hmm.
is how many folks become federal employees. In fact, I'm a contractor now part-time for the federal government for NASA. And within the past couple of months, I have a group with maybe a couple hundred people, at least 6, 7 people have just transferred over to the federal government to work for NASA because they got known by being a contractor first.
Hmm.
And there are agencies out there, there are agencies that only hire folks that have previously been contractors. They work a lot with contractor business, and then they'll select the contractors that they want for jobs in the federal government because they're a known quantity. So
Okay.
that's really important.
Okay. Now, somebody asked a question. I probably, maybe you might understand the context of the
Will
question.
your company still have to pay?
Yeah, will the company have to
The
say?
federal government pays for your clearance. If you're working for a company, the company pays. You can't pay for the clearance yourself. So therefore, it's really important that the federal government doesn't want to have to spend money out of their budget to do the clearance for that agency. If they have somebody who's clearable, they've now saved a whole bunch of money in their budget.
Oh, okay. All right. Good deal. Good
So,
question.
so here's what it is for the announcement. These are the 8 things that I have to look at it. The announcement deadline, you want to make sure you have enough time to apply because those deadlines are hard. They can move.
Mhm.
Nowadays, many announcements may say until we decide to close it, enough people apply. So the announcement deadline may actually be shorter than it's listed. But it's absolute. There are some agencies may extend deadlines. I've seen it happen more on like SES level positions where they
Mhm.
haven't done enough and they want to keep it open. Rate and salary level and occupation title must be a match for who your background is and what your experience level is. If you apply for a job that doesn't match your experience and what you can do, you're not going to get that job. Who may apply? Job duties are really important. Who may apply is really important because if you don't meet the right category, you can't apply for it. The background requirements for the job, these are the requirements you have to have in order to meet the minimum requirements for a job. If you don't meet them by law, people can, and you spell them out by law, the government can't hire you. KSA and questionnaires. KSAs have sort of, they're there, but they're not quite the same as they used to be. Questionnaires are on many jobs and are really important for screening. How to apply, you need to follow the instructions. And you also need to make sure you send in all the additional documentation required. And when you're going to open up a job, what I'm going to recommend is once you find a job that you want to apply for, there is going to be this button called print. You need to click on the print button. If you don't click on the print button, you will not see the entire announcement. This will open up in a new window and use the announcement that you hit print on. And that is the way to go. And I just got a question. If my background is similar, what's the best way to tailor my resume to fit what they are looking for? The federal government, it's difficult now. That used to be easy through 2011 because we could explain how our background is similar. Unfortunately, they now use questionnaires, and it depends on that questionnaire whether or not you'll be able to even tailor your resume to fit what they're looking for. What we're going to cover now is going to be the job announcement. And by looking at the job announcement, I then can point out the things that have to be on your resume in order for them to even consider you based on that job announcement itself. It's right now what I say is the federal government, to get a job there, unless you've totally networked and they've written the job announcement for you, it's not a place to change careers. It's a place to change job locations doing what you've already done. Get that clear. It's not a place to change careers, except if you are a disabled veteran.
So, a disabled veteran is there any place where they need to, there's somewhere where they can indicate that they are, should that be
And
something
they
that's
just indicate it right on their announcement, because in
okay,
the questionnaire on the announcement, it says you're a disabled veteran and you will have to send in the documentation. We're going to cover that further, but except you're a disabled veteran or a military spouse, sometimes you can get a job at a low level that is what you haven't done before. Because if you meet the minimum requirement in many jobs, the only requirement is that you graduated college. If you're a disabled veteran and you graduated college, you can get a GS5 job, any of them.
Hmm.
If you're, and perhaps GS7, 9 or 11, depending on what degrees you've got. So if you are a disabled vet, that's a tremendous leg up. Other than that, you're going to have done the job duties.
Right, and you'll talk more about that in
I
detail.
will talk more.
Okay.
So anyway, we first talk about the deadline. And this is an older announcement, so sometimes the tops look different depending on the announcement and the age of it, and they change it all the time. And they'll have opening and closing dates. Some jobs are only internal, listed on USAJOBs, they don't have to. Note, if an announcement is open for less than 7 days for most jobs, 30 days for an SES, the agency likely already knows who they want. Please note that I have seen intelligence jobs where people come to me wanting me to help them apply for jobs for the FBI and for all of the intelligence agencies. And I am really careful before helping somebody with those jobs. Many of those jobs, deep into the application process, will state that they can't let anybody know that they're applying for those jobs. And we'll have places where they say that this part of the application is, in fact, for Department of State, parts of the application which require essays say, we're using this to find out about your writing abilities. I can't help you, and somebody else should not help you with those portions, because they are there to do that. And some jobs, if they're for intelligence agencies and you had someone help you, somewhere down the process, you're going to go through a lie detector test. And they're going to ask you, did anybody help you with your resume? Or did you tell anybody you're applying for this job? I don't want to know about it. I don't want to help you with that resume.
In order to help their chances of getting the job, not because you don't want to.
No, I'm not saying a job isn't worth applying for. I'm saying that some people may not be suited for the jobs that are on USAJOBs. Just like because I'm a chemical engineer and I have certain degrees, I apply for a brain surgeon job outside the federal government. It's the same sort of rules. However, the federal government is explicit on who they're going to take. So it's clearer than it is for outside the federal government, where you might apply for hundreds of jobs, but you might have networked. But the rules are so clear because many of these jobs are covered by laws. So these are legal documents. So there's a little bit of more scrutiny on the federal process, trying to make everything even and clear to avoid lawsuits. Whereas on the civilian side, they can find you, then list another job that they have you apply for that you meet the requirements for, and get you that job. And sometimes that happens in the federal government too. especially on SES and higher level stuff. I've had folks apply, they were almost a fit. They didn't get the job, but because they now were known out there, they later on were able to leverage that to get a job that they're qualified for.
Okay.
I know you are hiding the line for me, but
yes,
no, if an
yes.
announcement is open for less than 7 days, for most jobs, 30 days for the senior executive service, the agency likely knows who they want. And this is great if you've been a person who's been tapped for it, because you have a better chance of getting that job because they've made it narrower. If it's less than that, I recommend that you reach out to the hiring manager listed on the job announcement to find out about the job, or network in to find out about the status of that.
I have a question that might be a little significant to where we are now as far as the year is concerned. There are people who are thinking maybe it would be useless to apply to a government job, being that with all these different timelines, that may not be, it may not uh, give them a leg up, or may not be able to make any sense to apply now because of the holidays that are approaching. What is in the civilian world? It's very plain forward. You keep applying.
You keep applying. You write a resume for one job that's close, especially if it's a series where there's lots of them, and then you just tweak it for the next one, so you'll be able to make that deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, unlike the civilian world, where applying lots of times to a company makes one think that you're desperate, the federal government only chunks through one announcement at a time. So you can apply for that 100 jobs and it doesn't impact your chances of getting a job.
That's good to know. We do have a question that why does reaching out seem so difficult? Where can we find their contact info?
Most job announcements have a contact. Actually, it's easier for federal than it is for non-federal. Most announcements will list who to contact for questions.
Good to know.
You'll have to read the announcement, but we'll say at the bottom, so usually close to the bottom of an announcement, we'll have the contact info. So you can ask questions about it, but they can only give you generic answers. They're not going to help you. Generally, you're going to have to do networking like you do in other places. It's like, who do you know? Who do you know? Who do you know? To be able to network for a given job. Just like civilian, we tell people to network. That's even more important on the civilian side. At least here, you have a chance if you just apply.
Okay.
And then you're going to have to look at your salary and grade level. Note, since sequestration in 2013, salaries by government, and they had to do this, they only pay unless you can really justify it and the agency has extra money. You will only get the lowest level of salary. I've seen folks get a little bit higher if they negotiate hard, but don't assume it's going to be there or available. So can you live, if this is a range, it will be the lowest level for that particular range in a location, because this could be several locations. But assume you're going to get that lowest level of salary for the grade level you're applying for in the location that you're in.
Now, if you're applying to a job where you had the experience, but you're just changing the location, does that apply to them as well?
It might. If you are in the federal government, you will keep your salary.
Okay, so keep the salary, and possibly they might give a little bit more if you're moving location.
They might pay more, but you don't remember your steps. So it depends on where you're going and all of that. If you work for the federal government, this salary range doesn't necessarily apply. But if you're applying from the outside as a veteran, or you're applying from the outside as a civilian, that salary range will apply.
Okay. All right.
And so there are different types of job series for federal jobs. The general schedule is the most common, and I base a lot of this presentation on the GS schedule because most jobs are on the GS schedule. There's wage grade for folks who are in the trades, So folks who are doing things like warehouse work and mechanical work at bases and stuff may be in the wage grades. The TSA and the Federal Aviation Administration have a schedule that's A to M that corresponds to the wage grade. And there's different executive schedule for the senior executive service, which goes basically kind of like different levels of generals in the military. So the lowest level to the highest level of generals. And there's other project pay scales that they have that are going to be varying from agency. Here's just one of them from one agency where they had a pay chart. And requirements for experience generally depend on the pay series. So I have here a little chart which shows the GS levels and what your military rank, if you've been in that rank for 1 year, should be for you to be able to apply for that job and be successful, where they'll consider your experience credible. They also have a civilian workforce where I'm giving the levels there. So these are kind of titles and companies and such like that, and where they are. And then looking at different GS levels. And then there's something called senior executive service, which requires someone who's a very big span of perhaps having hundreds of people working for them through other people and such like that. And generally, you'll need at least 10 years experience to become an SES. It used to be hard coded, no longer is, but I very rarely have seen anybody with less than 10 years experience become an SES. And salaries for pay levels are broken down into steps, and that allows for pay increases. That's what I was saying before. Someone can go in at a higher level because they're at a higher step. And generally, they're step one. Salaries depend on the type of series, pay grade, step, and job location. Pay raise are set each year based on inflation, and they'll be going up quite a bit probably next year. And the pay tables for 2021 can be found here. They have, in the past, under some administrations, frozen salaries to balance budgets and such like that, but I don't think they'll end up doing it this year. And there are specific qualification standards for each series and GS level, and some of the information on that can be found at that link. And each series will have their own standards, but you can find out what the jobs are in general by reading these. These is kind of like the equivalent of ONET in the sense it doesn't quite break it down as nicely as ONET, where you can look things up, but you're going to find out in general what each of these job type title series are all about to see where you might fit if you're trying to explore. And this can help generically to find the job. And now we're going to talk about who is the job open to. Is it internal to the agency? Is it going to be for federal employees? Is it for veterans? And I'm going to discuss some of these categories which may be of interest to these to the folks who are at this particular group. And again, we see this same thing who may apply. So this is the same screen as I showed you before, but I just wanted to show it again because that's really important. If you're not a federal employee, you can't apply. If you're a veteran, you may be able to apply, but you have to check also, do you have veterans preference? And for a while there, a lot of people leaving the military had veterans preference, but now that we're a decade out of when we are officially at war, that may be less and less, which is an advantage to folks who don't have veterans preference, because now they have a better chance of getting a job than you may have had 5 years ago or 10 years ago in the middle of a recession where most jobs were going to veterans because there was a lot of them out there and we were in a recession. National Guards and Reserves, senior executives, families of overseas employees. If you're a family of an overseas employee and you're on a base overseas, they can get jobs. Peace Corps, federal employees, military spouses, students, individuals with a disability, Native Americans, and special authorities. We're going to discuss some of these, not all. So I'm going to discuss in depth veterans' preference. With a veteran's preference, there's different types of them. There's disabled, non-disabled, and sole survivorship. You don't get points, but you still might be able to get that job because you're eligible to apply for that job. And not every veteran has 5-point preference, by the way. If you were if you were a major or higher, or did not serve during a period of war, or did not get a campaign badge, you may not have veterans preference. So you still may be able to apply for that job, but you may not be eligible to apply. I've seen that happen where people applied, thought they had veterans preference, sent the wrong forms in, or actually didn't, and were deemed ineligible for the job.
In your opinion, is it pretty clear when they get to that part, or is that something that they?
This is really unclear.
Mm-hmm.
As far as if you have it or not, I'm going to give some guidance.
Okay.
How to figure it out in a little bit.
All right.
Claiming veterans preference, you need to send in the right documentation, including the right form of the DD-214. You can also not only get your DD-214 from this National Archives Veterans Reference Service. You can go there, go to this site on USAJOBs under Veterans. You can also get your entire military records. This can be useful in preparing for your federal resume before going ahead and filling out your resume, get all the information. It will get you the dates and all sorts of awards, certifications, and everything else. Guard and Reserve service may not qualify you because it's full-time military service unless you have a campaign badge.
So campaign badge is the rite of passage, so to speak.
Campaign badges are serving full-time in the military at the right times, or having if you served during the war, you should have that campaign badge. So it makes a big difference, and full-time makes a difference versus part-time. There is also different kinds of hiring authorities, and I suggest that I'm not going to discuss them in depth here, but you can click on these links to find out more about them. And I'm going to go through some of these discussions here because it will answer some of the questions of the veterans' preference on this slide. You're 5 points eligible, but remember, if your active duty is this, but if you're an 04 or higher, you may not be eligible for it. But these are kind of the dates that people are going to be alive. So this one's quickly now becoming obsolete because people who served on these dates are going to be much too old to apply. You could be 10-point preference if you have a service-connected disability or received a Purple Heart. I think this you can use this particular link, and I've just changed it over, which is https://webapps.dol.gov e-laws. That's preference mservice.html to determine if you are eligible for veterans preference. So you can do that if you can use that to determine if you're eligible for veterans preference. So that's something else that you could do. Now, there's also some more information. Preference eligibles are divided into basic groups, which is disability rating of 30% or more, of at least 10%, but less than 30. Less than 10%, you may get 10 points. With no disability or sole survivorship. are differences between them, and it depends on the job announcement how they exactly include the differences of these two disability ratings. Disabled veterans receive 10 points regardless of their disability rating, but you will need an SF-15 form to document this status. If you are a veteran, you will need your service copy member when you apply, and it can be used for members no later than 120 days, but this may have changed. Sometimes they change it to longer. So you may have to check if they've changed it to longer at given times, but it's at least 120 days is the minimum that you can use it, but it may be longer than that. Sometimes they offer that. Announcements without a numerical, this is the most of the announcements that are listed today. This changed in 2011. Before that, this was a different system on the points. Compensational service delivery of 10% or more are placed in the highest category in the referral list. Other veteran preference eligibles are placed upon non-preference eligibles within their assigned category. Disabled vets, even at only the 10% level, may only need to qualify for the job to be on the top of the list. This is critical because many jobs will list only education as a requirement. Other things are desired, but if you have the right education, you can apply for any job that requires that education if you are a disabled vet. Note, if you are a Guard or Reserve and you get yourself become a disabled vet, you now have preference. Because then you don't need the campaign badge because you're a disabled vet. Additionally, 04s and higher who are disabled vets get preference. Announcements with a numerical rating and ranking system had allowed you to start out with 5 to 10% added to 5 to 10 points added to your score. Wasn't such of a benefit unless you had professional help, because if somebody applied for that job who had professional help and scored higher than you, they placed higher than you. And basically, they took the top 3 people of the veterans at a given store to put them at that top rank. So there was a rule of 3. So it was a very complicated system and really did not benefit vets that much. So when they were doing that, I was helping a lot of folks for 10 years get jobs in the federal government who weren't vets, and there were a lot of vets out there. Didn't matter. My folks got jobs almost every time because it was a lot easier to game the system before that. I recommend, if you're a disabled vet, work with veterans organizations, such as the DAV. I recommend, even if you've been out of the military for a long time, go back and see if you can get a disability rating. And you want to work for the federal government because you might just get it. You might just get that 10%. And you have a much better chance of getting that job. Plus, if you were in the Guard and Reserve and get that rating, you now can apply for jobs that require veterans preference.
Yeah, that's
Also,
a little bit better than it's a little bit better than civilian in the sense that civilian you're competing with people with and without disabilities, and they are really giving you a preference. And I know there are companies that will in civilian world that specifically say that they are looking for disabled veterans, which isn't always the case with the government. That they say that they're that these are your advantages. These are really your advantages.
Right, and the question that someone just came out, can the disability percentage points help to offset my skills if the qualifications do not match the job description? Yes, if you meet the minimum requirements for the job. If you do not meet the minimum requirements for the job and the minimum qualifications for the job, you will not get that job no matter if you have veterans preference or not. But if you meet those minimum qualifications and you are a disabled vet, you will meet that. In addition, if you're 30% or more disabled, you can be non-competitively appointed to this job. So if you find a job that you like and you're 30% or more disabled, go to the VA and find a VA representative who may be able to help you get that job, especially if it's GS9 or below. Or GS7 and below, especially if it's GS7 or below, you may be able to get that job without a job announcement even being out there. And that's what we were discussing earlier.
Now, I got a question for you. There's GS7s, how should I say this? GS7 levels, the GS level doesn't speak to how professional the job is considered.
GS7 is a professional job. If you remember before, I covered different series and I glossed over it. GS5, 7, 9, 11, and above are all professional at odd numbers, 5, 7, 9, 11.
Okay.
But non-ones could do that.
Okay. Yeah, there was another question.
100% permanent and total hurt? No, it will not hurt, as long as you are able to use that job. They do not consider the disability as hurting you or not hurting you because it only helps you get the interview for the job. Gets you through the initial process. They cannot actually use it. And in fact, the federal government likes to hire disabled folks because it helps them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion, or their equal employment opportunity statistics. So as long as you can do the job, being 100% permanent and total doesn't hurt. And in fact, if you're 100% permanent or total, your spouse, even when you get out of the military, has military spouse preference. So it could be an advantage. You see, we're going to the military spouse right now, spouse of an active duty member, or a spouse of a service member who is 100% disabled due to a service-connected injury. So if you have the 100%, your spouse can now apply and get preference. It used to be this was limited to 2 years after a permanent change of station for a military member where your spouse could apply for a job. That now is something that no longer holds true. It now is something that is anytime you're a spouse, you can apply for that job. You don't need to wait for the change of station to apply. It doesn't entitle you to a job. You have to apply and meet the qualification standards and additional requirements such as a background investigation. So it's really important that you always can pass these background investigations, which is why the status of your clearance becomes important. And if a job is open to military spouses, you can apply for those jobs. Maybe jobs that the public cannot apply for. So you have the option to be able to apply for jobs that other people can't if you're a military spouse. But you don't get any points, so you're not going to be placed ahead of other people, but you have the option to apply for jobs that aren't open for the public. Individuals with disabilities. Again, a lot of these can apply for jobs that will place you ahead of others and can be non-competitive. So you may only need to meet closer to the minimum requirements. You may have to, but you may be able to apply for different jobs, and you may be eligible to apply for jobs that aren't open to the public if you're Schedule A. So it doesn't guarantee you the job, but it's possible for you to get that job. Maybe possible for you to get it. Because they may list a job several different ways in order to select that best person. So you may be at the top of one of the announcements. So let's say a job is open up to the public where you get veterans preference and another job isn't. You may just end up with that job. Now, you also can get it if you're with the Peace Corps or other organizations to be able to do that also, which is another type of eligibility. And you also, if you're a current or former employee, you may be able to apply for certain jobs, and you have to read the job announcement carefully to know what that is and get some help if you need it. And you also may be able to apply for jobs that are only for current or former, which are merit promotions or whatever. I'm not going into this in depth because you're going to have to understand your own status, and you probably can get the help of your HR department or other ones once you're a federal employee to understand that. Other hiring options are transferring, interchange agreement, and CCAP ITCAP is really important to know about, because if your agency is eliminated or is downsizing and your job is being eliminated, you no longer need to be best qualified. You only need to be highly qualified to be forwarded to the hiring manager.
So,
which is why they have the three categories of qualified is for disabled vets, highly qualified is for some folks that are who are applying under the fact that their job is eliminated, and the best qualified is for most.
so, and I think that's been a standard for many years now. But I think the status that if somebody who is a veteran who no longer is enlisted, does that make a difference between them being enlisted and, you know,
It
the
does.
interim?
Let's say you're a best qualified veteran and a whole bunch of non-veterans apply. Only your resume is going to be forwarded, or only the veterans' resumes will be forwarded to the hiring manager. Because what happens then is that they can only hire a veteran. You're at the top of the list, and unless they can disqualify you, they have to hire a veteran if a veteran goes ahead and applies and is qualified. That leads to announcements sometimes if you don't have a resume which shows what you really are qualified, but you got through the initial screen, the hiring manager may decide to cancel that announcement if they don't really want you. And they may relist it with something else so you can't say you're free to be best qualified in the future.
Okay.
They'll be listing announcement. They'll change how they're listing that announcement to not have veterans at some point. I've seen that before too. So even though you think it's great, it's not always the great. And then there's additional ones of land management, base management for federal employees, different categories. You can be a member of the National Guard. There are jobs that are only open to folks in the National Guard. And you have to be a member of the National Guard to be able to get those jobs. And the who may apply section would say what it is. And there are some jobs where you have to, even if you're not a member of the National Guard, you have to become a member of the National Guard in order to get those jobs. And then there's other jobs which are like human resource specialist, which is internal only to the agency. You need to read the announcement to find out who may apply, as we noted before. Like this one's open to federal employees. They'll have it on the announcement. This one's open to the public. It's on the announcement. And this one will be open to various groups, which is federal employees, veterans, and individuals with a disability. And they also will state in the announcement some more information who may apply. So it may give you additional information on who may apply to a given announcement. So not only do you need to depend upon those symbols, the real legal thing is what's listed in the announcement. And it also may be listed on the online questionnaire that we're going to talk about later, because you're going to have to answer those questions with yes or no's, and this questionnaire is screening. So if you don't answer that right, you still won't get the job. And the next thing we're going to do is look at the job summary. This is really important. Best qualified candidates will have experience in all of the job duties and will list that in their resume, in their job descriptions. Saying it again, you need to list how you have experience in all of the job duties. Next, why duties are important. In order to qualify, unless it's a training position or qualifying on education alone, because you are a disabled vet, you must have experience in the job duties at the level below the position. If you're qualifying on education alone, it's going to be something that you must have that to qualify. To score highly, you must have experience in the job duties. You should have experience with every acronym in the announcement or able to show very similar experience. So you must understand the acronyms and how to say similar to this in your resume. And that may be transferable experience if you don't have an exact acronym, and knowledge of the acronym in your resume.
And that goes back to my earlier question. That answers it almost completely.
Yeah.
That the acronyms matter, though you should spell it out and include the acronym. So perhaps, make the acronym available and then put in parentheses on the application.
I actually put the full name first, the
acronym. Okay.
With parentheses, and then use the acronym throughout the rest of the document.
Gotcha.
Because that saves space, number one, if you're concerned at all by character counts, and you don't need to include the full name every time. That actually is the standard for federal documents.
Yeah. For those who might have a lot of experience, may have a lot of acronyms. So they probably wouldn't want to save as much space as they possibly could.
Absolutely. And we do that space saving every day when we're writing federal documents. Note that if you don't have the experience of qualifying on education alone, you will not be selected as that best qualified. Unless you're a disabled veteran, basically. Unless the announcement states that disabled veterans are placed into the best qualified category, because the announcement has to state that, and you are a disabled vet. Because there are announcements that are not, there are different types of announcements. There are announcements where being a disabled vet may not matter because it could be a direct hire announcement. There's competitive service and non-competitive service. And for non-competitive service jobs, being that vet may or may not help you get that job. You're going to have to read the announcement because the announcement will tell you. Check the requirements. Every job will have key requirements and qualifications. Background investigation required may be because this job requires clearance. Now they actually have a specific state place which states that clearance for that background investigation is going to be required. They consider clearance that important. And they'll go through and define what that specialized experience is, and your resume must demonstrate that in the resume explicitly. When you did it, how many hours you did it. Generally, they'll require at least 1 year experience, which is why they ask you for the number of hours you worked and the month and year that you've worked a given job. Some agencies also ask for day. So they can calculate 1 year is 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. So it's 2,000 hours. So that is how you go between part-time and full-time. So you need to have worked 40 hours a week for a full year at a job for it to qualify as 1 year of experience. And they'll ask for competencies sometimes, and they'll have different qualifications. And they also will tell you that you can substitute sometimes For education, you'll notice substitution of education for experience. And sometimes you can do that. And you'll see this job did indicate that it had security clearance. So that background investigation required secret, not as hard to get, but they'll hire someone who has secret clearance if you don't have it. And they may make that a requirement. And other announcements will have other experience listed, specialized experience directly related to the position. So it can also state that in there. So when you're going ahead and doing that, you're going to have to make sure that you have done all the job duties, because they may state that the requirement is having done the exact job duties. So your documentation must indicate whether they were done full-time or part-time, percentage of time, and you may even have to document that you did it for a certain number of hours. It's really important to read the announcement. There'll be some conditions of requirement, and we have to go ahead and do that also. This job, if it requires public trust background information, apply for that job. Everybody needs public trust background. It's a low-level requirement. Doesn't take them very long to get it. I have that. Doesn't take long. Step 5, why requirements are important. If you do not meet the requirements, you will not be considered for the job. You must be able to spell out all the requirements in your resume on how you meet all the requirements, or you will not get the job. KSAs and questionnaires. Most announcements, but not all, will have some KSAs in them. Before 2011, most announcements required you to spell them out separately in essays on how you met the KSAs. There was no questionnaire. That was great, because I could show how my transferable skill met the job requirement for the requirement of these KSAs. And got a lot of people in who could transfer their skills to the federal government. Now, most jobs, over 90% of them, especially those at the SES level, have online questionnaires. Those are multiple choice questions. It no longer is transferable skills anymore. There are announcements out there, more than there was under the Obama era, when he said he wanted everybody to apply with just a resume and a cover letter. And cover letters don't mean anything. Don't bother with them. Won't help you most times. Won't be officially considered. Put everything in the resume, only thing that's officially read.
Yeah, don't let some of our colleagues hear that. We're talking about federal jobs here, not the regular civilian jobs.
It's federal jobs. You can apply with a cover letter. There are some legal jobs that are out there, so people who are going for the legal professions will require a cover letter, but the announcement will state it directly. Otherwise, I can include a cover letter. Some announcements don't really allow you to put that in, because they say only what's required in the announcement. You need to read it. And even if you put in a cover letter, it says cover letter optional, because they were kind of required for some jobs to allow you to do that cover letter. But it doesn't account officially towards your scoring. Maybe it's good for the hiring manager, but who knows if the hiring manager will read it or not. So I would just make sure I put it somewhere in the resume, because that will be read.
So if you're going to use a cover letter, you got to make it count. It can't be something that you phone in. It's something that you want to be intentional and strategic about, especially if you're trying to use your experience as or your education as part of your experience.
It still won't help you.
Okay.
I'm just giving you that.
No. That's what I want you to say. I want you to go ahead.
The only thing you may want to do is, if you want to go ahead and impress the hiring manager, but you will get that interview anyway, so you can impress them in the interview. So
right.
If you put something in there that you feel really compelled to say, realize they may not see it, will not be considered for the scoring, and so you can do it, I don't know if it makes any difference. Most people I do stuff for get the jobs. I don't end up writing them cover letters because I don't like having people spend time or money on things that aren't going to be of value. I'm just one of those simple people.
No, that's great to know. That's great to know.
Okay, so these are things, and it used to be that you had essays for these that you'd have to put in for jobs. Some jobs still require it. FAA generally require, even if for the FAA, if they say essays aren't required because they are optional, but they have the space on their application for them. If you're applying for the job with the FAA, you better put in these essays for the KSAs. You won't get the job without it. Other agencies, I don't do the separate KSAs. I cover them within the resume, and I clearly show these particular items within the resume, even with the word showing, to show that I've addressed them. You can put them in separate essays too if you really want to, not required anymore. May or may not be read if it's in other information. Occupational assessment questionnaires. Really, these are the key importance. You must put in information in your resume that justifies every single answer you've put in the online questionnaire. You can open up the majority, not all of them, but for the majority of the announcements that have these online questionnaires, there will be a link somewhere in the announcement for the questionnaire. And you could see the questions before you ever prepare your resume. You must have your experience. This one says a line of D&E to be incomplete, and you will be removed from consideration for the position. So you have to tell them what you did in the job, which job you did, the things that you're an expert in. You have to document it in your resume. If you don't do that, sometimes they just completely get rid of your application saying you're not qualified or put you in the lower level or actually disqualify you from even getting that job. So you must be able to say you have the right experience. And then they're going to ask you A, B, C, D, and E. And they many times will ask you for D or an E, which job did you do it in? Because the way that these applications are scored for folks who first answer that they're qualified, they will go to the reviewer, anyone that's qualified and the right kind of status will go to a reviewer who has two screens in front of them. Your answers to these online questionnaire questions from USAJOBs and your resume from USAJOBs or however you applied, and they will go back and forth between the two announcements. So the questionnaire will give you a preliminary score. We'll give them a preliminary score, and the reviewer is now going back and reviewing it to make sure that you included that information in your resume. So that's how they score these. And that's a physical person reading your resume and reading the job announcement questions that you answered. And if you can't answer E, if you're not a disabled vet and you can't answer E to every single question, you may consider whether this is a job you can apply for. I say maybe one or two you could do D2, but if it's like at the top of the announcement or some really arcane screening questions at the bottom of the announcement, which agencies will do, and you can't answer E, that you are the expert in every one of these questions and be able to document it on your resume, Your chances of getting that job are low because you will not score as best qualified. So your resume will not be forwarded to the hiring manager. The KSAs also are important. As we discussed before, you may consider creating KSA answers separately so you can be ready for the interview or request for them on the second round of announcements. Now, note, when you are interviewed, you're interviewed on the questions in the questionnaire, the job duties, and the KSAs. They are behavioral interviews, so you're being able to address everything in your resume and know what you've done to address everything in the job announcement, if you get selected, will help you with that interview. And as I noticed before, some agencies or jobs specifically require the separate KSAs. As I noted before, answer E to all the questions. And how you will be ranked. As I said, sometimes they do it in 4, sometimes they do it in 3, depending on how they're selecting people. Normally, I just see 3, but I occasionally see 4. Best qualified, highly qualified, and qualified we've discussed. And you see, qualified veterans will be afforded preference by being placed on the top of the group that they're put in. The best qualified group is the first referred to the hiring facility for further consideration and possible interview. The remaining groups may be referred, but they're not, except sometimes highly qualified folks who are being let go from other jobs may get into that be also referred in some jobs. Another one, how you will be evaluated. So this was best qualified, well qualified, or qualified. So they'll name them different things, but it's really 3. And they explained here in this job what the process was about. And you need to follow all instructions carefully. If you don't do it, you may not be eligible for the job. And they're calling it category rating because they have to legally state that. But that's what's done now for 90 to 95 to 100% of all the jobs. How to apply. They have dates involved. Submit your answers. You can use USAJOBS gov and use the account login to be able to apply for that job. You can fill out the application. Some jobs only let you use the USAJOBS resume. Other ones allow you to do a lot of different resumes. If everybody's using a USAJOBS resume rather than a free-form resume to apply, you're going to look the same as others. Veterans preference document. They'll tell you about it. Member for copy must contain dates and character of service. You're going to tell you what documents are required. And if you're going to be somebody who's being let go, they go ahead and make sure that you have the eligibility. And then other required documents. You see here, they had the view occupational questionnaire on the announcement. Always try to find what they call the questionnaire, occupational questionnaire, or questions. You want to go ahead and upload it first because you're going to have to complete that. So every thing will have information on required documents and how to apply. You need to follow those instructions. And here are some strategies if you're not a match for a job. Date closing too soon, find another announcement. I don't believe it's a good idea to apply for a lower level to get your foot in the door in the federal government. I actually was talking to somebody today who has been in the federal government for a long time, started too low and never made it up to the level that he should have. And he's ready to retire right now. It's not easy to advance in the federal government up several grades at once. Additionally, if you are a manager and can apply for a GS-14, it's not an easy job to get. And you apply for a job below a GS-14, going from GS-13 to GS-14 is the hardest move in the government. So you might get a GS-13 and you could end up staying there for a very, very long time, even if you get into the federal government, especially because that's the differential of being a doer and being a manager. Officially, you need to spend 1 year. Generally, it's really about 2 or more years. And if you get a job at a much lower level, it costs you $1 million over your career or more. Because if you go much lower, if you were paying 100, you took a job at 50 because you wanted to get in the federal government because of so-called bennies that really only cost you $10,000 a year, but you can get those bennies somewhere else, then you're really cutting yourself off if you got a job much lower.
I think a lot of people like the idea that, or they've gone off the old idea that the government will also save them because they've saved other people's jobs. That's not particularly true anymore. But when
No.
I was in doing a lot of training through the government, a lot of people will hold on because they're used to getting saved quite frequently before 2010, but after then, all bets are off. So no one should find security in any job.
It's totally off. In fact, I did the same thing as you. I went to, I guess, about 6, 7 bases one summer around the whole country where I did outplacement for all sorts of federal employees who were being laid off. And this would have been somewhere around 2015 or so. Did a lot of that. I traveled all summer. 2015, 2016, I think it was around 2015. I traveled all summer on a contract where I was doing outplacement workshops at many military bases around the country where they were laying off very many in all sorts of different categories, civilian employees. So I did the same thing you did.
My bet is that you got a chance to work with Kathy Troutman, who's written a lot of books on.
I know Kathy Troutman. I took a federal resume certification that no longer exists anymore from her in 2003. I also started when I worked for Barbara Adams, who you may also know, and I worked for her for my first 5 years, which is how I learned how to write federal resumes.
I didn't get to know that, but I actually have 3 or 4 books that Kathy Troutman wrote in the last 10 years.
Right.
So I keep it as a reference.
And I work directly with one person who wrote one of those. If you have the book on the SES, Barbara Adams wrote a book on SES, as well as Diane Hudson. And the group people I work with, the person I work with her in the federal government, Diane Hudson, right now.
Yeah. So interesting. Cross paths maybe at some point.
Cross paths at some point, but yeah, I've known Kathy Troutman since 2002.
Yeah. So I've never met her. My friend Mark Miller, I think he had her on his show on the Repurpose Your Career podcast about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I never got a chance to meet her, but again, you couldn't work federal government without knowing some of her work because she provided so many reference materials at that time.
Right. So I'm very familiar with her work. When I work with Barbara Adams, also has books on federal resumes and military to civilian and all sorts of stuff like that. And I worked with a lot of military folks, for many years with her because we were located right outside of Warner Robins Air Force Base at the time. So I wrote lots of resumes for military folks getting federal jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So and also if you apply for a job at too high a level, you may be rejected. Even if you get the job, you may not have the skills to do it. You may be bored. People don't like to hire people who know a lot more than them. It's not good for them generally because they want to move up too. So it depends on. So you really need to be careful, and you may actually expand your job search to be a lot longer, thinking it's easier because there's more jobs at a lower level. But the higher level job you're more likely to get because there's not as many people who have those skills. Whereas
Yeah.
if I want to be a secretary who can type on Microsoft Word, there's thousands of everybody basically can do that, or many
Right.
people can do that. Whereas if I want to be a chemical engineer to work with TVA on the extraction of uranium, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, I could have gotten that job because I was working with TVA to extract uranium.
Hmm. Well, you're also a Ivy League graduate, so we won't
Yeah, I'm
have
a graduate, but I'm just
we'll keep that in mind.
you understand what I mean. But if you had that experience, why would I want to
Right.
be a secretary for this?
Right. Exactly.
So
I
I end
mean,
up. So if
it's
I end
not a
up,
matter of it's not a matter of getting your foot in the doors. Doors, a matter of applying to a job where your experience is appropriate.
yeah, exactly. And now I'm going to cover a little bit on federal resumes. What the differences are. Formats. Federal resumes have specific formats that differ depending on the announcement. It's pretty much set now, but occasionally it still is different because there used to be a lot of different alphabets. There was NASA stars, there was Resumix, there was AView, there was other types of ones. Now it's really pretty set what's required for federal resumes, USAJOBs, or a paper format that has all of that information. It's character counts matter on USAJOBs. They can matter on ECQs where you're limited to 10 pages and
Hmm.
you have to have 1-inch margins using a Times New Roman 12 format font. But other than that, very limited ones. You'll see it in the announcement. Most of them do not have any limitations on character count. And
Hmm.
even if the USAJOBs has limitations, you can get around it. Then there's a lot of required information that's very different than civilian resumes. And I list some of them here, but it's all very different and it's a lot more detailed. And if you omit this training, you omit this information, you'll not get the job. Whereas on a civilian resume, if you included some of this information, you would not get the job.
Right. Right.
So you have to be careful on that. Length. Federal resumes, which 3 to 15 is a rule of thumb. I usually write longer, but it could be shorter than, not shorter than 3. Then corporate resumes, which are really like 2 pages, 1 page for a recent grad, maybe it could be longer. And then job information. Federal resumes require detailed descriptions of duties, repeated for each job you did them in. Could be a boring document, but you're not going to get credit unless you list those duties.
Right. Yeah, I've seen them. I've seen them 25 pages,
Yeah, I've written that
and
long.
they are absolutely needed because they need to know all the
Right.
detail for some of those jobs, even going back to high school, even if you're
Yeah.
50 years old.
Because some people say you can go back 10 years. You need to go back at least 10 years in detail, but you should go back further if it's related to what you want to do, especially if it could be qualifying you for some of the things that are in there. And if you're applying for a job that requires clearance, they're going to know all your background and how old you are. Don't worry about the
Mhm.
age of it. Put it in. Worrying about ageism is a fear that they may find out anyway, because you're going to have your age.
Right.
Plus, you're going to have your age because you're going to have the date you graduated from school because you have to put that in there.
Right. Right.
You have
But
to send up, and you have to send up your transcript to prove it. So you're going to have that already. So
right.
therefore, don't worry about the ageism on there. Just put it in there because if you're going to worry about ageism and that person is so concerned about ageism, they're going to figure it out anyway because you're
Right.
going to go through based on your score to the hiring manager, and they're going to know because they're going to be interviewing you, so they're going
Hmm.
to know how old you are.
Yeah.
Someone just asked that question recently. Additional documentation. You're going to have to fill out all of this information. Generally, you don't send it anymore, but it could be an announcement that you do. But ever since that they don't do sending, but faxing or uploading can be something you do. And they have additional multiple choice, and it's not just many anymore. 90, most have, and they must be addressed And if you answer affirmative to most, if not all, so if there's multiple choice, you have experience in 15 different things, you may need experience in all those 15 different things to get that job, because the hiring manager or the organization may be using that as a screen to keep veterans out, especially for jobs beyond the GS7 level, which may require you to have experience at, because of certain types of jobs. If you're GS9 or above, being just a disabled vet may not put you in that top category. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And then you can email me for a free federal resume template, which will make sure that you include all the information required in a federal resume. Won't include all the duties or everything, but at least it'll be a template where you can fill it in and make sure that you put in all the information that they require.
Well, that was a phenomenal. I really thought it was great. I was in it the whole way, so I know that there'll be people who will really love this and get a lot of value out of it. Marcus, who was the one who was participating, was really grateful that you went into the detail that he did. There were things that he didn't even know. And then he had friends who gave him questions to ask. So I know there are a lot of people who will get a lot of value over it. I mean, in it over time. And thank you so much for providing such detailed information. Now, people can go to your site for more information if once you have it up, so that way they can watch the presentation. They can also go to the slideshow if they only want to see the slides only. Eventually, right?
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it's there now.
okay, and
The
people can go right now.
slideshow, I sent you the link to that, so you can use the link because I've already put it up into slideshow.
Great, great. And so I'll put that link in the chat for
Right.
the rest of you. And so thank you very much for spending the time
Yeah.
giving us that information. You've done this, you've been doing this for 20 years now. So
I mean, actually,
um,
about a little bit over 20 years.
over 20 years. So you've seen the migration and the changes from the different formats to when it was just a barely respondent site to now being a fairly robust one.
I've seen it from when you sent in paper resumes. You could not search USA Jobs. You had to call in to have somebody do stuff, or use an outside site that would be putting in the data. It would be old. You'd apply for jobs, whether it be some agencies started using resumes. Most applications were paper,
Mm-hmm.
and you physically had to make sure you applied in time that you could mail those applications in on time.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for everybody else so they can get the information. Go ahead, get right way. And thank you all for watching. And I know that there'll be many, many more that will watch this in the future, and they'll use this as staple as to helping them to apply to jobs. And because it'll be out there, it'll be on all of my channels, particularly, especially the YouTube, the Twitter. The Twitters is already there. LinkedIn is already on the timeline, and as well as my Facebook page. And I'll probably have it pinned up so that people can get to it a lot quicker if they want to access it. And again, YouTube, I hope it'll be up tomorrow morning because we have nearly 2 hours. And you know, if you try to upload a nearly 2 hour video to YouTube, you know, even if you have great Wi-Fi speed, it takes a little bit of time. So I will put that in the chat as well so that people can get a hold of it in the future if they prefer to watch it on YouTube rather than LinkedIn. Signing off. Thank you all very much for watching, and you all have a great day.